Hello there and welcome to another Friday night for another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. I'm Rafael Di Furia, back at it again on another Friday night to talk a little bit more about life abroad, living abroad, and all the funny little bits in between. Anyway, a quick little thing. If everything has gone to plan, I wanted to say a warm welcome to those of you who are watching this as a video podcast on Spotify. Hopefully everything's gonna work out, but just a quick little warm welcome to you guys. But this episode, like the title says, I want to talk about some of the apps that I use. Some of them may seem very, very basic about which that you would even have them on your phone, maybe anyway. But maybe some of the ways that I use them might help you a little bit navigating through your expat life a little bit. But also, I know probably somebody's just going to say something, Rafael, it's the end of June. Why are you dressed like that? It's actually been pretty chilly here in Portugal. Like in the night, it's going down into like the 50s. And today, I think the high was like 63 or 64 Fahrenheit, like floating around somewhere around the kind of 15-ish mark in Celsius. But it's been pretty chilly recently. Even today is a big festival here in Braga, but it's raining out, so I'm not sure I'm even going to go out. If I do, this is going to be the part here where I put the clips of everything that's been going on and how people are dealing with it. It's probably going to be pretty packed anyway, but just a quick little thank you also to those of you who help to make content like this possible through the one-time donations, through the thanks button, or through rafaeldifuria.com/support. or through rafaeldifuria.com/Patreon, patreon.com/rafaeldifuria. For the monthly support, you all help this project to be able to continue, and really thank you all so very much. But of course, it is time that we get started. So in no particular order, we're going to be going down this list, but roll that intro. So the first application, some of you may say, oh no, how could he support that evil system and have that app on his phone, but Facebook. Yeah, I do actually think as an expat in most places in the world, it is actually very valuable to have. But for two reasons, the groups feature and the marketplace feature. The groups are really nice because just about wherever you go, at least for a major area, maybe a region, depends on where you are. Even in Braga, there's some really great Facebook groups that have a super supportive community. The only thing is sometimes with Facebook, there's a Facebook little notification right there. But you do have to be careful about bitter expats, about people who've been abroad for a while and just aren't happy where they are. But Facebook groups that are, say, for example, expats in such and such place, or the name of the country and then expats after it. Look through, rephrase it in different ways, like the name of your town and expats, or expat and the name of the town, or expats in. These types of groups can be very helpful. Of course, you may want to take some of the advice with a grain of salt, and kind of gauge who's been there longer, who's been there shorter. And also maybe if people are mentioning about services, why are they mentioning about the services? Because I will say that in a lot of Facebook groups, especially among non-native speakers of a language in a country, they do tend to go with certain providers of certain services that do charge the expat tax, as I call it, and do charge higher rates for their services. Whenever possible, if you're looking for somebody to do your taxes or whatever it may be, I always recommend going with a local that speaks your language and is not going to charge you the expat tax, because their main the main client base are not expat individuals. But also, Facebook Marketplace can have a lot of value as somebody moving to a new country, and maybe you're trying to save a little bit for furniture, to get used furniture or whatever it may be. I mean, even in some of Europe, you do have these different websites. Like in Portugal, there's OLX that has listings for different things, kind of like a Craigslist sort of website. And even Italy has their own versions of these websites. So I'm not saying necessarily, oh, you have to only use Facebook. No, there are alternatives. And sometimes you need to use a few of these things in conjunction to get the best experience overall. But this next app that I want to get into can be a little bit of a lifesaver. And some people will be saying, oh, how could you use that app? Some of these choices that I'm going to be talking about in this episode, there are going to be people scoffing their way through this. But I do think that this next app has a lot of value to it, especially with some of the updates. It's not perfect. It doesn't always work 100%. However, it's not as bad as some people make it out to be, and that is Google Translate, especially with the camera feature and the Google Vision that's built into the app, that you can face your phone towards a sign and it translates it. I mean, even for example, I have some friends from Iran, and they were showing me a poem in Farsi. And so I was curious what this poem said, because there was a little bit of a difficulty with translating it. And so I faced my phone at another phone screen and saw this beautiful poem that was written in another language. It didn't translate perfectly, but I got the gist of it. So it made it really nice, but you can also speak into it and have a conversation with another person that way. But really, I would say day to day, it's worthwhile having for the little things. Even though I speak some Portuguese, I speak some Italian, I speak other languages, and when I go to certain countries, I'm pretty okay. What I will say is that it helps to fill in the gaps to make sure that maybe you're using the correct word. Sometimes it's not the best for that. You have to know a little bit of the context and to know. But what I will say is actually, it's not the best always at translating food. So what I do in that case is I'll go to Google Images and search the name of the ingredient or the dish or whatever it is on Google Images itself, and to get an idea of it there, because sometimes maybe one thing can have 5 different translations. And especially with how English works, sometimes we don't specify certain things, and also some other languages don't specify certain specific ingredients or whatever, or we may have multiple words for the same thing. Or even between British and English, the difference between rocket and arugula. I mean, oh yes, I'm going to have a rocket salad. It's like, oh no, I don't want no rocket fuel in my salad, thank you. But it's important to understand some of these things. Not perfect for everything, but in those pinches where you will need, or you don't have the language at all, it can help with the interaction. I've had at like hotels and pensione and places like this to be able to actually check in. So just worthwhile having, and also being able to download the dictionary for the language definitely helps a lot. But the online translations are definitely better than the downloaded translations. Just something to keep in mind. But of course, one thing that's really important while you're abroad is being able to stay connected with those who you love, who you care about, your friends, and so on, or maybe work. So being able to have, of course, internet and a way to text people or even call is really important. So if you're from the States especially, there's an app called Rebtel. It was kind of meant to be as like this sort of way for people to have a telephone without being associated and being able to protest freely or whatever. I'm not totally sure, but that was kind of the rebellious telephone, or rebel telephone was kind of the basis of it. But what's really nice about Rebtel is that they do have options on there for you to be able to actually call to the US for free, or to call to other locations around the world at okay rates. You could, in this case, potentially use something like Skype if you're calling to another country, but they also don't have the best rates. But having these options available, of course, you do have other options for being able to call people. WhatsApp, for example, but both people have to be using WhatsApp, or I guess Signal would be another one, or even iMessage and FaceTime. You just want to have it all organized before you go, before you jump off, how you're going to keep in contact with people. Hey, do you have WhatsApp? Because if you have WhatsApp and the other person doesn't have WhatsApp, you're not going to be able to make the connection, or even Facebook Messenger. You'll be able to do these things. So just worthwhile to have that all set up and ready to go. Another one is Google Maps. Of course, because to be able to get around, it's important to have an idea. I will say I've tried other applications and other systems and services to find maps online. Just for me, Google Maps seems to work the best. Also, it seems to have the largest community of people that are on there updating and adding reviews to restaurants and so on. So that's actually a really big deal. And also not just restaurants, but businesses. But what I will say is that I sometimes use Google Maps for restaurants in conjunction with Instagram, and to try to find if there's a page on that account to see if maybe you can get a little bit of an idea of what they're posting, and then also what other people are posting. Because sometimes the images on Google are a little limited or blurry images, because of course anybody can upload. But of course the same goes for Instagram, but also some businesses may not have an Instagram page, but they'll have a Facebook page. So using these in conjunction with each other, like I was saying before, can really be helpful. Like I said, some of these things are just really basic and you would do that anywhere else, but I'm making this episode to let people know that you don't have to do anything crazy special for what it is that you need from day to day. I mean, even going back to Google Translate, for example, being able to go to the supermarket to know the difference between cream and non-fat, dairy, whatever, it's important at the end of the day. So that's why I'm talking about these things, even though they are somewhat basic. But what I will say also is that you do want to keep in mind about how you're going to stay connected. And so I've mentioned this in a previous episode. There's an app, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, Airalo, whatever. All of the links will be down in the description. And I do happen to have a referral code for Airalo. But that's going to be one where you can get an eSIM that your phone, if it is eSIM compatible, to be able to use and have a data connection while you're there. Because trying to make sure that you're connected and being able to be connected for these apps that I'm talking about is going to be very important. So in Portugal, you can get options. But of course, I mean, if you're in Portugal or in Italy is not the same. Getting a prepaid plan is not the same. Iliad would be an option for that. But in Portugal, you do have like Mayo or Nosh or Vodafone that you can go and get a card and just have data or whatever. I would say probably for data only package, Mayo would be the one that I would personally look at, just because of the way that they charge is basically like $1 a day. And you can have, at least at the time of recording, unlimited internet. Basically, you can get it like 30 for 30 days, 50 for 50 days, and so on. But the reason why I mentioned Airalo is because you can get different data packages for different countries. The one little thing that's a little tricky on there is that sometimes the SIM card may not actually be from the particular country that you're aiming for, and it might be from another place that happens to have services available for that area where you will be. So just something that I've heard about. I haven't experienced this, but I have heard about that you may want to keep in mind. When I did use them for Portugal, the Mayo services that I got were from Mayo. So just to keep in mind. But the next app, well, actually, it's not an app specifically, but it's a category of apps. To have your banking app from your country, it is so important that you have the ability to check your bank or to contact your bank. That's one of the other reasons why something like Rebtel could be interesting, is because then you would have the ability to call your bank if, for example, your card gets blocked or something. Of course, before you go to another country, it's always important to call them up and say, hey, I'm going to be in such and such place for such and such amount of time. Please add a note to my account. Some banks may not need this, but some banks, it will actually make a big difference, and because you don't want to have to deal with a blocked card when you're in another part of the world when you need access to cash. So definitely make sure that you do have that access available. But then also, of course, being in another country, you will want to check about what bank locally will have an application available in English. Not all banks offer apps in English. So just keep that in mind. You can download them ahead of time and you should have a pretty decent indication. But keep in mind the translations aren't always something that will be quite normal. I will say that there have been moments with some applications from some companies that I have gotten a little bit confused about how things exactly work. But what I will say is that in the past, I have talked about N26. As time goes on, I find that I'm less and less able to really recommend it. I'm not going to say it's a bad service, and I'm not going to say it's something that I would say a person shouldn't use. However, I think there are alternatives that make a little bit more sense nowadays. For example, something like Wise or Revolut. You're going to have to see which one may work better for you, but they do offer cards that allow you to bank internationally, hold multiple currencies in your account. For example, Wise, I mean, it makes it very easy to be able to just spend your money. But of course, different apps and different companies have different ways that they work, and they charge conversion fees at different times. I mean, at least Revolut, if I'm not mistaken, does charge conversion fees depending whether it's the week or if it's the weekend. But I believe Transferwise does keep it pretty similar. But These are things that you kind of have to keep in mind, or if your local bank can hold multiple currencies, or if you can transfer and they'll automatically convert. These are things that you just want to have an idea of before you leave so you don't have to fumble around after the fact. Because in some places in Europe, for example, you may need a banking number that's from the country. Other places, it doesn't really matter. So if that is the case, like Wise or Revolut, you may not be able to get a local bank account transfer number to be able to get people to send to you, or for bills to be automatically taken out. These are just some things that you may want to take into consideration. So you may also actually want to use a combination of your bank in your country, Wise or Revolut, plus a bank locally, and just kind of balance them and make them work between each other. I mean, sometimes Wise doesn't have the best transfer rates, but it can help, because there are definitely situations where they do have the best rates, and Revolut also can have some really great rates as well. One thing to keep in mind while you are abroad, if you're going to use something like Uber Eats or whatever for delivery, you will need a local number. And the data packages that I was talking about before, they're not going to give you a local number that somebody can call you on. So that's just something you want to keep in mind. That you will want to get a SIM card for that. I'm not making those recommendations. Oh, you should use these apps or whatever. But if you do plan to, just because this is an episode all on apps, I figured this little detail may actually be really important, especially because like what I experienced coming here to Portugal, I was so wiped out and I didn't even think about it before arriving, that the first night I was here, I really was thinking, okay, it's going to be the perfect time to order some delivery and make it easy, no problems. But I didn't have the local number for the delivery services to be able to register me in the system, because of course it's not just about registering the system. If they can't find your door, they need to be able to call you. But if you don't speak the language, then that's a whole different problem. But you need a phone number locally to be able to use these services. Except for Uber Eats, I believe they do have a VoIP system that's built into the app. So just check it out. It may or may not work. Your mileage may vary. The last little category that I'm going to talk about here is to make sure, because you're going to be making so many new memories in your new location, that if you're going to be taking a lot of photos, have a way to keep them safe. And so one way of doing this, of course, is just to back up to your computer every so often, or you may be able to set up an automatic service like Google Drive, Apple, whatever cloud, or something like that, or Dropbox. I don't personally use these in this way, but I know it's very important for a lot of people. I'm not saying that I personally use these services in this way. I have from time to time, especially if I'm going to be traveling somewhere and I know I'm going to be taking a lot of photos, then I'll make sure that I have something set up. You would hate to lose something. Like, it would be horrible to lose these photos. Of course, if you're having these automatic backups, of course, you need something, a way to have this internet connection. I would not recommend connecting to random Wi-Fi networks. You could use a VPN if you wanted. If you don't know what that is, then there's plenty of really great YouTube videos about that. But you may want to look at an option. I'm not going to say that there's one that I think is better than the rest. I mean, there's a lot of great options out there. ExpressVPN, NordVPN, private internet access. I mean, there's a lot of really great choices out there. So it can be worthwhile having, especially if you're going to be checking emails or if you're going to be checking your bank, whatever it may be. It can be really good to have that extra layer of security on top, because I've known plenty of people who've gotten onto public Wi-Fi networks and have had problems because of it, especially while traveling abroad, but also even in their home countries. But anyway, this is where I'm going to end off this episode. So of course, a huge thank you for joining me for another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter, but an even bigger thank you to those of you who helped to make these episodes possible through the one-time donations, as well as the monthly support that help this project to keep going. RafaelDifuria.com/support, the thanks button down here on YouTube, as well as the monthly support through Patreon, patreon.com/RafaelDifuria, RafaelDifuria.com/Patreon. And also a huge thank you to those of you who are subscribed and who like and share these episodes. It is truly appreciated, because that also is another way that this project does get helped out. So thank you all very much. But of course, I'm Rafael Difuria. Stay safe and healthy out there. Thank you so much for joining me again for another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. Until next Friday, see y'all next time. Later.